They expected him to bring a supermodel and heiress, or maybe the daughter of a rival Don, to secure a peace treaty. Maddox Corbin, the most feared capo in the New York underworld, didn't do casual. Every move was calculated. Every breath was a negotiation. So when he stepped out of that blacked-out Rolls-Royce for the wedding of the decade, the silence was deafening. He wasn't holding the hand of a princess. He was holding the hand of the woman who had served him coffee that morning, a woman who had no idea she was walking into a war zone wearing a target on her back. This is the story of how a fake date brought down an empire. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Aidan Jenkins wiped down the counter of The Rusty Spoon for the 100th time that shift. It was 11:00 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the diner was empty except for the man in the corner booth. He had been there for 2 hours. He hadn't touched his burger, but he was on his 4th black coffee. He wore a suit that cost more than Aidan's entire life's earnings, custom charcoal wool that fit his broad shoulders like armor. He was typing furiously on a phone that looked encrypted enough to launch a missile strike. "Refill?" Aidan asked, her voice raspy from exhaustion. She was 24, but she felt 50. Between her father's gambling debts and her mother's medical bills at Providence Hospital, sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. The man looked up. His eyes were the color of cold steel. "Please." As Aidan reached over to pour the coffee, the door to the diner burst open. 3 men in leather jackets stormed in. The air in the room changed instantly, charged with static and violence. Aidan flinched, her hand jerking. Scalding hot coffee splashed all over the stranger's pristine cuff and the expensive watch on his wrist, a Patek Philippe, though she didn't know that. "Oh my God. I am so sorry," Aidan gasped, grabbing a rag. The stranger didn't even blink at the burn. He wasn't looking at the stain. He was looking at the reflection in the window. "Get down," he said calmly. "What? Get down." Before Aidan could process the command, the stranger moved with a blur of speed that defied physics. He kicked the table over, flipping the heavy oak slab onto its side, just as the front window shattered inward. Pop, 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 gunfire. Aidan screamed, scrambling behind the counter. Glass rained down like confetti. The stranger, Maddox Corbin, was already moving. He pulled a matte black pistol from a shoulder holster she hadn't noticed. He didn't fire wildly. He took 2 shots. 2 of the intruders dropped instantly. The 3rd man scrambled for cover behind the jukebox. Maddox vaulted over the overturned table, moving with the predatory grace of a panther. There was a brief struggle, the sickening crack of bone, and then silence. Aidan was curled into a ball under the cash register, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She heard heavy footsteps crunching over the glass coming toward her. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. "You can come out now," the deep voice said. She opened her eyes. Maddox was standing over her. He holstered his weapon and adjusted his now coffee-stained cuff. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a checkbook, and scribbled something. "I apologize for the mess," he said, his tone devoid of adrenaline, as if he'd just dropped a plate rather than killed 2 men. He ripped the check out and placed it on the counter. "This should cover the damages to the establishment." He turned to leave, then paused. He looked at Aidan, really looked at her for the first time. He took in her frayed uniform, the dark circles under her eyes, the terrified but defiant set of her jaw. "What is your name?" he asked. "Aidan," she whispered. "Aidan Jenkins." Maddox nodded once. "Aidan, you have a shift tomorrow." I think I just quit," she stammered, looking at the bodies. "Good," Maddox said. Be at the Blackwood Private Airfield at 6:00 p.m. tomorrow. Hangar 4. Why would I do that? She asked, finding a sudden spark of anger through the fear. You almost got me killed. Maddox leaned in close. The scent of expensive cologne and gunpowder filled her nose. Because, Aiden Jenkins, I know about your father's debt to the Russo syndicate. I know about the $40,000 he owes, and I know they plan to collect it next week. Aiden's blood ran cold. How do you? I know everything, he said softly. He tapped the check on the counter. That check is for $50,000. It's yours. Consider it a down payment. I need a favor. Aiden looked at the check. It was signed Maddox Corbin. The ink was still wet. $50,000. It was enough to save her dad. Enough to pay for her mom's surgery. What kind of favor? She asked, her voice trembling. Maddox's lips curled into a dry, humorless smile. My brother Stefano is getting married in Tuscany this weekend. The bride is a Russo. It's a political union meant to stop a war. But the Russos are trying to corner me into a marriage of my own with their second daughter, Bianca. I need a buffer. I need a date who looks innocent enough to disarm them, but tough enough not to break when the sharks start circling. He looked at the shattered window, then back to her. You didn't scream when the shooting started, he noted. You didn't run. You hid. You survived. I need a survivor, Aiden. Be at the hangar. 6:00 p.m. He walked out into the rain, leaving Aiden alone with the wreckage, and a check that weighed more than her soul. The Blackwood Private Airfield was less of an airport and more of a fortress. High fences armed guards with earpieces and a lineup of jets that cost more than the GDP of a small country. Aiden stood at the gate of Hangar 4, wearing her best dress, a simple navy blue thing she'd bought at a thrift store for a job interview 3 years ago. She felt ridiculous. She felt terrified. But the check had cleared that morning. Her father's debt was paid. She owed this man. A massive SUV pulled up, and a driver opened the door. Ms. Jenkins, Mr. Corbin is waiting on the jet. Aiden climbed into the Gulfstream G650. The interior was cream leather and mahogany. Maddox was sitting in a captain's chair, sipping an espresso, reading a file. He looked up as she entered. He scanned her outfit, his expression unreadable. You came, he said. I pay my debts, Aiden replied, clutching her purse. Just like you paid mine. Sit, he commanded, gesturing to the seat opposite him. As the plane began to taxi, Maddox slid a thick document across the table. This is a non-disclosure agreement. Whatever you see in Tuscany, whatever you hear, stays in Tuscany. If you speak of my business to anyone, the police, the press, your father, the consequences will be severe. Aiden signed it without hesitating. I'm a waitress, Mr. Corbin. I know how to keep my mouth shut. I hear people's secrets all day long. Nobody notices the help. That, Maddox said, is exactly why I chose you. But for this weekend, you are not the help. You are Aiden Kensington, a curator for the British Museum. We met at a charity gala in London 6 months ago. Aiden laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. I've never even been to London, and I don't know anything about art. You don't need to know about art. You just need to know how to look bored when people talk about it, Maddox said. He snapped his fingers. From the back of the plane, 2 women appeared, one wheeling a rack of clothes, the other carrying a makeup case. We have 9 hours until we land in Italy, Maddox said, returning to his file. Fix her. The next 9 hours were a blur of torture and luxury. Aidan was scrubbed, waxed, polished, and painted. Her mousy brown hair was dyed a rich, lustrous chestnut and styled into soft waves. Her nails were painted a deep blood red. They dressed her in a gown Maddox had selected, an emerald green silk slip dress with a slit that went dangerously high up her thigh. It was elegant, simple, and screamed money. When she stepped out of the lavatory, transformed. Maddox stopped typing. He stood up slowly. The air in the cabin seemed to thin. He walked around her, inspecting her like she was a weapon he was considering buying. He stopped behind her, his breath ghosting over her neck. "Do you know why the Russos want me to marry Bianca?" he asked quietly. "No," Aidan breathed. "Because Bianca is loud. She is flashy. She is a distraction. They think if I am busy managing a high-maintenance wife, I won't notice them taking over my territories in the shipping ports." He stepped in front of her, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough, calloused, the hands of a man who worked, despite the suits. The touch sent a jolt of electricity down Aidan's spine that had nothing to do with fear. "But you—" Maddox's eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "You are quiet. You observe. You are dangerous in a different way." "Is that a compliment?" Aidan asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "In my world, it is the highest compliment," he replied. "Now listen to me carefully. The wedding is at the Castello di Vicarello. My brother Stefano is weak. He thinks he is marrying for love, but he is marrying into a viper's nest. Don Salvatore Russo. The bride's father will try to intimidate you. He will try to make you feel small. If anyone asks you a question you can't answer, you touch your necklace." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a diamond pendant, a single teardrop diamond that must have been 5 carats. He fastened it around her neck. His fingers lingered on her collarbone. "Touch the diamond," he repeated, "and I will step in. I will never be more than 5 feet away from you. You belong to me this weekend, Aidan, and no one touches what belongs to Maddox Corbin." The plane banked, beginning its descent into the golden hills of Tuscany. Aidan looked out the window. She wasn't Aidan the waitress anymore. She was walking into a world of blood and gold, hand in hand with the devil himself, and God help her, she was ready. The Castello di Vicarello was a fortress of stone and ivy perched atop a hill overlooking the Ombrone Valley. It was breathtakingly beautiful, bathed in the golden hour light of Tuscany. But as the motorcade of black SUVs wound its way up the cypress-lined driveway, Aidan felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The courtyard was filled with people who looked like they had walked out of a Vogue editorial. Men in linen suits and loafers, women in couture gowns, sipping Aperol spritzes. But beneath the laughter and clinking glasses, there was a tension, a low hum of danger that Aidan, having grown up in a rough neighborhood, recognized instantly. The car stopped. The driver opened the door. "Showtime," Maddox murmured. He took her hand. His grip was firm, grounding her. As Aidan stepped out, the conversation in the courtyard died down. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. She felt exposed, a fraud in a sea of predators. But then she felt Maddox's hand slide to the small of her back, his thumb rubbing a soothing circle against the silk of her dress. "Chin up," he whispered, his lips barely moving. "You are above them. Remember that." A young man with Maddox's dark eyes, but a softer, more anxious face rushed over. This was Stefano the groom. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. "Dom, you made it," Stefano said, pulling his brother into a stiff embrace. He looked at Aiden, confusion flickering in his eyes. "And this is Aiden Kensington," Maddox said smoothly. "My date." Stefano's eyes widened. "But Bianca is here. Father Russo was expecting you to—" "I don't care what Salvatore Russo expects." Maddox cut him off, his voice dropping an octave. "Where is the bride?" "Inside," Stefano said, lowering his voice. "She's terrified, Dom. Her father is pushing for the port deal to be signed before the vows are exchanged. He's using the wedding as leverage." "Typical," Maddox sneered. Just then a woman detached herself from a group near the fountain. She was stunning raven hair, olive skin, wearing a red dress that looked like it was painted on. This was Bianca Russo, the woman Maddox was supposed to marry. She sauntered over, a glass of champagne in her hand, her gaze raking over Aiden with undisguised venom. "Maddox," she purred, ignoring Aiden entirely. "We were starting to worry you'd backed out. Daddy has the contract ready in the library." "I'm not here for business." "Bianca," Maddox said coldly. "I'm here for my brother." Bianca finally looked at Aiden. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "And who is this one of your temporary amusements?" Aiden felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks. She wanted to shrink away, but she remembered the $50,000 check. She remembered the gun in Maddox's holster. She remembered that she had survived a shootout less than 24 hours ago. Aiden channeled her inner waitress dealing with a difficult customer. She smiled, sweet and sharp. "Aiden Kensington," she said, extending a hand. "And I'm not temporary. I'm the one he brought to meet the family. There's a difference." Bianca blinked, taken aback by the audacity. Maddox's hand tightened on Aiden's waist, and she felt a radiate warmth from him approval. "Charmed," Bianca spat, ignoring the hand. "Enjoy the castle, Aiden. It's easy to get lost here if you don't belong." She turned on her heel and walked away. "You handled that well," Maddox murmured as he guided Aiden toward the massive oak doors of the castle. "I've dealt with drunk truckers and angry Karens for 5 years," Aiden whispered back. "A rich girl in a red dress doesn't scare me." "She should," Maddox replied, his face grim. "Bianca isn't just a rich girl. She's the Russo family's accountant. She washes their money. She's smarter than her father and twice as cruel. Watch your back." They were shown to their suite, a master room with a balcony overlooking the vineyards. As soon as the heavy door clicked shut, Maddox dropped the act. He paced the room, checking the windows, checking for bugs. "The wedding is in 2 days," he said. "Tonight is the rehearsal dinner. That is where the real attack will happen. Not with guns, but with words. Salvatore will try to humiliate you to get to me. He wants to prove you are unworthy, so he can push Bianca back into the picture." He stopped pacing and looked at her. "Do you know anything about wine?" he asked suddenly. "I know red goes with steak, and white goes with fish." Aiden shrugged. Maddox sighed. "Tonight they will be serving a 1997 Brunello di Montalcino Biondi Santi. If they ask you about it, you say the tannins have softened perfectly, but it still has the structure of the vintage. Memorize that." "Tannins softened structure of the vintage," Aiden repeated. "Got it." "And Aiden." She looked up. He was standing close again. The intensity in his eyes made her breath hitch. "If you get overwhelmed," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "just look at me. I won't let you fall." The rehearsal dinner was held in the castle's wine cellar, a cavernous, candlelit hall that smelled of old oak and money. A single long table was set for 50 guests. The silverware was heavy sterling. The napkins were linen. Aidan sat to Maddox's right. To her right was an empty chair. At the head of the table sat Don Salvatore Russo. He was a massive man, occupying his chair like a king on a throne. He had a thick white beard and eyes that looked like black marbles. He hadn't spoken to Aidan yet. He had just watched her. The first course was served truffle risotto. The conversation flowed mostly in rapid-fire Italian that Aidan couldn't understand, though Maddox translated snippets for her in a low whisper. Then the empty chair to her right was filled. A man slid into the seat. He was younger than Maddox, with slicked-back blonde hair and a jagged scar running down his cheek. He smelled of cigarettes and expensive leather. "You must be the mystery girl," the man said, his voice a low drawl. Maddox stiffened beside her. "Luca." He acknowledged, his tone icy. "Luca Moretti," the man said to Aidan, ignoring Maddox. "I run the casinos in Vegas." "And you are?" "Aidan," she said, keeping her voice even. "Just Aidan." Luca smirked. He picked up a knife and began twirling it on the tablecloth. "Maddox usually has better taste in jewelry, but I suppose he's slumming it tonight to annoy Salvatore." Aidan felt a knee press against hers under the table. Maddox. He was ready to snap. She placed a hand on Maddox's forearm, stopping him. "I'm not jewelry, Mr. Moretti," Aidan said, turning to face the scarred man. "Jewelry is something you buy to make yourself feel important. Maddox doesn't need to buy things to know his worth. Do you?" The table went quiet. Luca's smile vanished. He stared at her, the knife still spinning. Suddenly, a booming laugh echoed from the head of the table. Don Salvatore was laughing. "She has claws," Salvatore roared. "I like that. Maddox, she speaks for you now." "She speaks for herself," Maddox said, taking a sip of his wine. Salvatore leaned forward, the candlelight casting long shadows across his face. "Tell me, Miss Kensington, you work for the British Museum, yes?" "Yes." Aidan lied, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Wonderful." Salvatore smiled. "I recently acquired a piece, a bust of Emperor Hadrian, 2nd century, but I have doubts about its authenticity. Tell me, in your expert opinion, how does one identify a forgery from the Antonine period?" The room went silent. This was the trap. Bianca, sitting across the table, smirked over the rim of her glass. Maddox's hand clenched into a fist on his thigh. He opened his mouth to intervene to deflect, but Aidan's mind raced. She thought back to the diner. Not the coffee, but the old man who used to come in every Sunday, Mr. Henderson. He was a retired geology professor who would talk her ear off about stones and marble while he ate his eggs. "The marble," Aidan said, her voice clear. Salvatore raised an eyebrow. "The marble, yes." Aidan continued, praying Mr. Henderson hadn't been senile. "Most forgeries use Carrara marble because it's available, but true Roman busts from that era were often carved from Parian marble, which has a much more translucent grain. If you hold a light to the stone, a forgery will absorb the light. The real thing, the light glows inside it like skin." She paused, looking Salvatore dead in the eye. "And of course the weathering. A forger uses acid to age the stone, which leaves a uniform yellowing. Natural aging is uneven. It gathers in the crevices." Silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. Salvatore stared at her. Then he looked at Maddox. "She knows her stone. She knows everything," Maddox said, his face impassive, though Aidan could feel the relief radiating off him like heat. Bene, Salvatore grunted. Maybe she is not just a pretty face. The tension broke. Conversations resumed. Aidan let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 10 minutes. Did you make that up? Maddox whispered, leaning close to her ear. A customer told me once, she whispered back. I have a good memory. You are amazing, he murmured. But the night wasn't over. As the main course was cleared, Aidan noticed something. Her years of waiting tables had given her server vision. She noticed the staff. She noticed who was working, who was slacking, and who was out of place. There was a waiter, a thin man with a trembling hand, pouring wine for Stefano, 2 seats down. He was sweating, profusely, and he kept glancing at Luca Moretti. When the waiter moved to pour Maddox's glass, Aidan saw it, a tiny, almost invisible flicker of his wrist. He wasn't just pouring from the bottle. He had palmed something, a small vial. As the red liquid splashed into Maddox's glass, Aidan didn't think. She didn't calculate. She reacted. Just as Maddox reached for the stem of the glass, Aidan knocked her heavy silver fork off the table. It clattered loudly onto the stone floor. "Oh, I am so clumsy," she cried out, diving down to retrieve it. In the process, she accidentally bumped the table hard with her shoulder. The vibration sent Maddox's wine glass tipping over. The dark red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth like a pool of blood soaking into Maddox's lap. "Damn it!" Maddox stood up, brushing off his pants. "I'm so sorry," Aidan gasped, standing up, looking mortified. The waiter looked terrified. He took a step back. "Get him a towel," Aidan yelled at the waiter, locking eyes with him. "Now." The waiter flinched, looked at Luca Moretti, who looked furious, and then ran towards the kitchen. Maddox looked at Aidan. He was about to scold her, but then he saw her face. She wasn't embarrassed. She was pale, her eyes wide and urgent. She subtly tapped her finger against the rim of her own empty glass, then flicked her eyes toward the fleeing waiter. Maddox froze. He looked at the spilled wine. He looked at the waiter disappearing through the kitchen doors. He realized instantly what had happened. He grabbed a napkin and wiped his pants, his face turning into a mask of cold fury. "It's fine," Maddox announced, to the room, his voice calm but deadly. "Accidents happen. Excuse us. Aidan and I need to get some fresh air." He grabbed Aidan's hand, pulling her away from the table, away from the poison, and out onto the terrace. Once they were alone in the cool night air, he pinned her against the stone balustrade, not in anger, but in adrenaline. "You saw something," he demanded. "What did you see?" "The waiter," Aidan breathed, shaking. "He had a vial. He put something in your glass. Luca was watching him." Maddox closed his eyes and exhaled sharply. He rested his forehead against hers. "You just saved my life, Aidan Jenkins. Is this normal for you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Poison at dinner. In my family." Maddox opened his eyes, staring into hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "It's a Tuesday." He reached up, cupping her face in his hands. The line between fake and real was gone. He wasn't looking at a fake curator. He was looking at the woman who had just thrown herself between him and death. "I told you I needed a survivor," he whispered. And then under the moonlight of the Tuscan sky, the Mafia boss kissed the waitress. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was possessive, desperate, and tasted of danger. And for the first time in her life, Aidan didn't want to run away. She wanted to burn. The kiss ended not because they wanted it to, but because reality came crashing back in the form of heavy footsteps on gravel. Maddox pulled back, his eyes dark and dilated. He didn't say a word about the kiss. He didn't have to. The electricity between them was loud enough to power the entire estate. "Stay behind me," Maddox commanded, his voice returning to that steel-edged tone. Two of Maddox's personal guards, massive men named Cole and Sterling, rounded the corner. They were dragging the trembling waiter between them. The waiter's feet dragged on the stone. He was sobbing quietly. "We caught him trying to hotwire a caterer's van," Cole reported. "Found the vial in his pocket." Maddox looked at the waiter with a terrifying lack of emotion. "Bring him to the stables, the old ones, where the guests won't hear." He turned to Aiden. "Go to the room. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." "No," Aiden said. Maddox blinked. "No. I'm not going to your room to wait like a frightened princess while you handle this," Aiden said, her voice shaking but firm. "I'm the one who saw him. I'm the one who knows what Luca looked like when he signaled him. You said you needed a partner. Partners don't hide." Maddox stared at her for a long moment. He looked at her delicate dress, the diamond necklace, and the fire in her eyes. He nodded once. "If you come, you see everything. You understand?" "I understand," she said. They moved to the stables, a stone structure away from the main castle. Inside, the smell of hay and old leather mixed with the metallic scent of fear. The guards threw the waiter onto a bale of hay. Maddox removed his tuxedo jacket, folding it neatly, and handing it to Aiden. He unbuttoned his cuffs and rolled up his sleeves. "What was in the vial?" Maddox asked calmly. I don't know," the waiter stammered. "He just said it would make you sick, just enough to get you out of the dinner." Maddox walked over and picked up a rusted horseshoe. He examined it idly. "Luca Moretti pays you €5,000 to put something in my drink. You think it's a laxative, a sleeping pill?" Maddox moved so fast, Aiden flinched. He slammed the horseshoe into the wooden post next to the waiter's head. The wood splintered. The waiter screamed. "It was tetrodotoxin," Maddox said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Pufferfish poison. Even a drop paralyzes the diaphragm. I would have suffocated at the table while conscious, unable to speak. It's a painful way to die." The waiter turned pale. I swear on my mother. I didn't know it would kill you." "Luca Moretti doesn't make mistakes," Maddox said. "Why tonight? Why at the rehearsal? He said the wedding is a wash." The waiter cried out, desperate to spill everything. "He said tomorrow doesn't matter because the deal is already done. He wanted you dead before the vows." Maddox froze. He looked at Aiden. "The deal is done?" Maddox asked. "What deal?" "The port." The waiter sobbed. "The shipping port in Naples. Don Salvatore signed it over to the Chinese syndicate an hour ago. Luca brokered the deal behind the Don's back. He's selling the family out." Maddox stepped back. The pieces clicked into place. "That stupid son of a—" Maddox muttered. He looked at Aiden. "It's a coup. Luca isn't just trying to kill me. He's betraying the Russos. He's going to sell the port, take the money, and leave the Corbin and Russo families to destroy each other in the fallout." Maddox turned to his guards. "Lock him in the tack room. Keep him alive. We might need a witness." He grabbed Aiden's hand and marched her out of the stables, walking fast toward the castle. The moonlight cast long shadows across the lawn. "What does this mean?" Aiden asked, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "It means the wedding isn't a peace treaty anymore," Maddox said grimly. "It's a slaughterhouse. Luca has planned something for tomorrow. If he wanted me dead tonight, it's because he knows I'm the only one who can stop it." They reached the side entrance of the castle. Maddox pulled her into the shadows of an alcove. "We should leave," Aidan whispered. "We should get Stefano. And leave right at now." "We can't," Maddox said. "If we leave, Luca wins. He takes the money, my family loses our territory, and Stefano will be the first casualty. Luca will frame him for the failed deal." He looked down at her. "I have to stay. I have to stop the wedding. But I can get you a car. I can have Cole drive you to Florence. You can be on a plane back to Seattle by morning." Aidan looked at him. She thought about her life back home. The grease stains, the rude customers, the crippling debt, the loneliness. Then she looked at the man in front of her. A man who walked through fire for his family. A man who had looked at her, really looked at her, and seen strength instead of poverty. She reached out and took his hand. "I signed a contract, Maddox," she said softly. "I'm here for the weekend, and I'm not leaving you alone with these sharks." Maddox stared at her, his expression softening into something raw, something vulnerable. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. It was a chaste kiss, but it felt like a promise. "Then get some sleep, Aidan," he whispered, "because tomorrow we go to war." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and deceptive. The Tuscan sun bathed the vineyards in gold birds, sang, and the smell of jasmine filled the air. It was picture perfect. Inside the Corbin suite, the mood was funeral. Maddox was already dressed in his tuxedo, checking a clip of ammunition before sliding it into his pocket. Aidan sat at the vanity, while the makeup team, who had no idea they were painting a soldier for battle, fussed over her hair. "Remember," Maddox said, speaking to her reflection in the mirror while the stylists were distracted, "stay in the front row. Do not eat anything. Do not drink anything. And keep your eyes on Luca." Aidan nodded. She was wearing a floor-length gown of silver silk chosen by Maddox. It was stunning, shimmering, like liquid moonlight, but beneath the layers of silk strapped to her thigh was a small ceramic knife Maddox had given her, just in case, he had said. The ceremony was held in the castle's ancient chapel. It was a suffocatingly small stone room, filled with flowers and the most dangerous criminals in Europe. Aidan walked down the aisle on Maddox's arm. She could feel the tension radiating off him. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight. They took their seats in the front row. Across the aisle sat the Russo family. Don Salvatore looked smug, unaware that his own underboss Luca had sold his empire out from under him. Luca sat behind the Don, looking bored, checking his watch. "He's checking the time," Aidan thought. Why, the music started. Stefano stood at the altar, looking pale and sweaty. Bianca walked down the aisle. She looked magnificent in white lace, but her eyes were cold. This wasn't a wedding. It was a merger. The priest began to speak in Latin. The air in the chapel grew hot and stifling. Aidan watched Luca. He wasn't looking at the bride. He was looking at the choir loft above the altar. Aidan followed his gaze. The choir was singing, their robes swaying. But there was one man in the back row who wasn't singing. He was holding his hands under his robe in a way that looked unnatural. Aidan nudged Maddox. She didn't speak. She just tapped his hand 3 times and shifted her eyes upward. Maddox looked. He saw the man in the choir loft. He saw the glint of metal beneath the robe. A silencer. "Stefano!" Maddox roared, shattering the sacred silence of the church. The entire congregation froze. "Get down!" Maddox shoved Aidan to the floor, just as the assassin in the choir loft opened fire. "Foot, foot, foot!" Bullets chewed into the stone floor where Aidan had been sitting a second ago. The chapel erupted into chaos. Screams, shouts, the sound of wood splintering. Maddox didn't take cover. He vaulted over the pew, drawing his gun. He fired 2 shots toward the loft. The assassin jerked back, hit. "Security!" Don Salvatore bellowed, confused. "What is the meaning of this? Your dog is off the leash, Salvatore!" Maddox yelled, pointing his gun, not at the Don, but at Luca. Luca had jumped up, but not to fight. He was running toward the side exit of the chapel. "Kill them all!" Luca screamed. Suddenly, half the guests in the back rows stood up and pulled out Uzis. They weren't guests. They were Luca's mercenaries. "Cover!" Maddox shouted, grabbing a heavy brass candelabra and flipping a heavy oak pew over to create a barricade. He grabbed Aiden and pulled her behind it. "Stay down! Maddox!" Aiden screamed, pointing to the altar. Stefano was standing there, frozen in shock. Bianca had hiked up her wedding dress and pulled a gun from a thigh holster. She was a Russo, after all, and was firing back at the mercenaries. But Stefano was a sitting duck. Maddox cursed. "Cover me!" "With what?" Aiden yelled. "Just stay alive!" Maddox broke cover, sprinting through a hail of bullets toward his brother. He tackled Stefano just as a line of gunfire stitched across the altar cloth. Aiden huddled behind the heavy oak pew. The noise was deafening. She saw a mercenary flanking them, moving down the side aisle, aiming at Maddox's exposed back. Maddox didn't see him. He was too busy shielding Stefano. Aiden's hand went to her thigh. She felt the ceramic knife. It was useless at this distance. She looked around, wildly. The pew in front of her had a heavy stone vase full of lilies. Aiden didn't think. She stood up, grabbed the vase with both hands. It must have weighed 30 pounds, and hurled it with all her strength at the mercenary. The vase smashed into the man's shoulder, knocking his aim off just as he pulled the trigger. The bullets flew wild, shattering a stained glass window above Maddox's head. The mercenary turned toward Aiden, his eyes wide with shock and rage. He raised his gun toward her. Bang! The mercenary dropped a neat hole in the center of his forehead. Aiden looked across the chapel. Maddox was lying on the ground, his gun smoking, looking at her with an expression that was half terror, half awe. "I told you to stay down," he roared, though there was no anger in it. "I missed," Aiden yelled back, adrenaline surging through her veins. "You did great." The chapel doors burst open. Reinforcements, Maddox's men led by Cole, stormed in from the outside. They were heavily armed. The tide turned instantly. Luca's mercenaries, realizing they were outgunned, began to surrender or flee. But Luca was gone. Silence slowly returned to the chapel, replaced by the groans of the wounded and the sobbing of guests. Don Salvatore stood up from behind the altar. He was unhurt, but he looked old. He looked at the carnage. He looked at Maddox, who was helping Stefano up. "Luca?" Salvatore asked, his voice trembling. "Gone," Maddox said, walking over to the Don. "He sold the port to the Chinese. He tried to kill me last night. And today he tried to wipe out the leadership of both families so he could walk away with the cash." Salvatore's face turned purple with rage. "He is a dead man." Maddox holstered his gun. He turned and walked straight to Aiden. She was still crouching behind the pew, shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Her silver dress was ruined, covered in dust and flower petals. Maddox hauled her up and pulled her into a crushing hug. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in her scent, verifying she was real, she was alive. "You threw a vase," he mumbled into her hair. "You threw a damn vase at a hit man." "It was all I had," she sobbed, clutching his lapels. "You are crazy," he said, pulling back to look at her. You are absolutely crazy, and you are magnificent. Is it over? She asked. Maddox looked toward the side door where Luca had fled. His eyes darkened. Not yet, he said. Luca has the money transfer codes. He's heading for the airfield. If he gets on a plane, he vanishes, and he takes my family's future with him. Maddox turned to Cole. Get the car. We're going to the runway. He looked at Aiden. This ends now. The drive to the private airfield was a blur of speed and silence. Maddox drove the stolen Alfa Romeo like he was trying to break the sound barrier. The Tuscan countryside whipped past in a smear of green and gold, but inside the car the air was cold. Aiden clutched the dashboard, her knuckles white. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't crying. She was calculating. He'll have a pilot waiting, Maddox said, his eyes fixed on the road. A Cessna Citation. Fast, long range. If he gets wheels up, he's gone. He'll disappear into a non-extradition country, access the offshore accounts, and drain the Corbin and Russo reserves dry within an hour. Can't you call the tower ground the plane? Aiden asked. Luca owns the tower. Maddox grimaced, downshifting as they drifted around a sharp corner. He's been planning this for months. He bought everyone. The staff, the security, the pilots. That's why he was so confident. He glanced at her. You don't have to do this part, Aiden. Stay in the car when we get it there. I threw a vase at a hitman, Maddox, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. I think we're past stay in the car. Maddox almost smiled. Fair point. They burst through the chain-link gates of the airfield, metal screeching as the car tore the lock apart. Ahead on the main runway, a sleek white jet was already taxiing its engines, whining in a high-pitched scream. The stairs were retracting. He's moving! Aiden shouted. Maddox slammed on the gas. The Alfa Romeo roared, the engine red-lining. He wasn't driving toward the terminal. He was driving straight onto the tarmac. Hold on! Maddox yelled. He swerved the car directly into the path of the oncoming jet. It was a game of chicken, a 2-ton car versus a 20-ton aircraft. The pilot of the jet panic-braked. Tires screeched, smoke billowed, and the massive plane lurched to a halt just 50 feet from the nose of their car. Maddox kicked the door open before the car had even fully stopped. He was out, gun drawn, moving toward the plane. Open the door! Maddox roared, aiming at the cockpit windshield. The pilot, terrified, killed the engines. The whine died down. The door of the jet hissed and lowered slowly. But Luca didn't come out with his hands up. Instead, a woman appeared in the doorway. She was a flight attendant, sobbing a gun pressed to her temple. Behind her, using her as a human shield, was Luca. Drop it, Maddox! Luca screamed, his voice cracking. Drop it or she dies! Maddox froze. He held his gun steady, but he couldn't take the shot. The angle was too tight. If he missed, he killed an innocent civilian. You're a coward, Luca, Maddox shouted. Hiding behind a woman, even for you this is low. I'm a rich coward, Luca sneered. Now kick the gun away. Kick it. Maddox hesitated. He locked eyes with Luca. He calculated the distance. 30 yards. Too far to rush him. Aiden watched from the passenger seat of the car. She saw Maddox's hand loosen on the grip of his weapon. He was going to surrender. He wouldn't let the flight attendant die. That was the difference between Maddox and Luca. Maddox was a killer, but he had a code. Luca was a monster. Aiden looked around the car. She needed a weapon, a distraction, anything. Her eyes landed on the car's console. There was a button labeled Sport Mode, and next to it the high beams. She looked at Luca. The sun was setting behind him, casting long shadows, but the car was facing him directly. Aiden slipped into the driver's seat. She didn't think about fear. She thought about the diner. She thought about the time a drunk patron had pulled a knife on her, and she had blinded him with a pot of hot coffee. Distraction, she thought. Just give him 1 second. Aiden slammed her hand onto the horn and simultaneously flicked the high beams on, flashing them rapidly. The sudden blaring noise and the flashing lights startled Luca. Ideally, he should have ignored it, but his nerves were frayed. For a split second, a fraction of a heartbeat, he flinched, his eyes darting toward the car, his gun wavering just an inch away from the flight attendant's head. That was all Maddox needed. Bang! A single shot rang out across the tarmac. It was a perfect shot. The bullet struck Luca directly in the right shoulder, shattering the bone. Luca screamed, dropping the gun and spinning away from the flight attendant. The woman scrambled down the stairs, falling onto the tarmac safe. Maddox was sprinting before Luca even hit the ground. He bounded up the stairs of the jet, disappearing inside. Aiden sat in the car, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. She heard shouting from inside the plane, then the sound of a struggle, a crash, and then silence. She opened the car door and stepped out, her legs feeling like jelly. She walked toward the plane. Maddox appeared in the doorway. He was adjusting his cufflinks. He looked calm, composed, but his eyes were hard. He was dragging Luca by the collar of his expensive suit. Luca was conscious, but groaning, bleeding heavily. Maddox threw Luca down the stairs. He landed in a heap at Aiden's feet. "It's over," Maddox said, walking down the stairs. Sirens wailed in the distance. The Italian police, the ones who weren't on Luca's payroll, were finally arriving. Luca looked up at Aiden. His face was pale, sweaty, and twisted with hate. "You," he wheezed. "You're just a waitress." Aiden looked down at him. She looked at her ruined silver dress. She touched the diamond necklace at her throat. Then she looked at the gun lying on the tarmac near his hand. She kicked it away, sending it skittering across the pavement. "I'm the waitress who just cost you everything," she said coldly. "And frankly, the service here is terrible. You didn't even tip." Maddox let out a short, sharp laugh. He walked over to Aiden, ignoring the approaching sirens. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I think I'm going to throw up," she admitted. "That's a normal reaction," he said. "Hold it together for 10 more minutes, then you can fall apart." "Deal," she whispered. As the police cars swarmed the runway surrounding them, Maddox didn't look at the authorities. He looked at Aiden. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "You saved me," he said. Again. "We make a good team." She managed a weak smile. "We do," Maddox said, a strange intensity in his voice. "We really do." 3 days later. Aiden stood on the balcony of Maddox's penthouse in Rome. The city was spread out below her, a tapestry of ancient stone and modern lights. She was wearing her own clothes again, jeans and a sweater. Her bag was packed by the door. The private jet was fueled and ready to take her back to Seattle. She heard the glass door slide open behind her. Maddox walked out. He was wearing a casual black shirt, sleeves rolled up. He looked younger, lighter, now that the war was over. He held a piece of paper in his hand. "Your flight leaves in an hour," he said. "I know," Aiden said, not turning around. She didn't want him to see her eyes. She didn't want him to see that leaving was breaking her heart. "I have your payment," he said. Aiden turned. He held out a check. It was for $1 million. "Maddox," she gasped. "The deal was $50,000. This is hazard pay," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. You took a bullet for my family. You stopped a coup. You saved my life twice. Frankly, I'm underpaying you. Aiden took the check. Her hands trembled. This was freedom. This was her mom's medical bills paid forever. This was a house, a business, a life she had only dreamed of. Thank you, she whispered. There's just one problem, Maddox said. He leaned against the railing, crossing his arms. What? If you go back to Seattle, who is going to watch my back? Aiden frowned. You have Cole. You have Sterling. You have an army. They work for me, Maddox said softly. They fear me. But you stood up to me. You threw a vase at a killer because you refused to run. I don't need an army, Aiden. I need a partner, a queen. He stepped closer. He took the check from her hand and placed it on the railing. Then he took her hands in his. Don't go back, he said. Stay. Stay. Aiden's heart hammered. And do what be your fake girlfriend. No, Maddox said. He lifted her hand and kissed her knuckles, his eyes locking onto hers. Be my real one. Maddox, I'm a waitress, she said, tears pricking her eyes. I don't belong in this world. The guns, the politics, the danger. You navigated a shark tank of billionaires and murderers, better than anyone born into it, Maddox countered. You belong wherever you want to belong, and I want you here. With me. He reached into his pocket. Aiden expected a ring, but instead he pulled out a folded napkin. It was from the Rusty Spoon. It was stained with coffee rings. On the back, written in Maddox's sharp handwriting, was a list. 1. Brave. 2. Smart. 3. Beautiful. 4. Mine. I wrote this the night we met, he said, while I was watching you work, before the shooting started. I knew then. Aiden looked at the napkin, then up at him. The tears finally spilled over. You're dangerous, Maddox Corbin, she whispered. I am, he agreed, pulling her into his arms. But I will burn the world down before I let anyone hurt you. Aiden looked at the packed bag by the door. Then she looked at the $1 million check. Then she looked at the man who made her feel more alive than she had ever felt in her life. She reached out and picked up the check. She ripped it in half. Maddox raised an eyebrow. That was a lot of money. I don't want the money, Aiden said, wrapping her arms around his neck. I want the job, but I have conditions. Name them, Maddox said, his hands settling on her waist. No more keeping secrets. No more fake names. And if we go to dinner, she smiled, leaning in close. Yes. I pick the restaurant, and nobody shoots at us. Maddox laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed over the Roman skyline. I can promise you 3 out of 4. He kissed her, then deep and slow, a kiss that sealed a new contract, not for a weekend, but for a lifetime. The waitress from Seattle was gone. The queen of the Corbin Empire had arrived, and God help anyone who stood in her way. And that is the story of how a spilled cup of coffee turned a struggling waitress into the most powerful woman in the underworld. Aiden didn't just survive the Mafia. She conquered it, armed with nothing but her wits and a ceramic vase. What would you have done in Aiden's shoes? Would you have taken the $1 million and run back to safety, or would you have stayed with Maddox and embraced the danger? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of danger, romance, and revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. We have a new saga coming next week, involving a runaway princess and a bodyguard with a dark past. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.